Hello and welcome back to the Atelier training for the 2020 Colorado Seatbelt Survey. We've already taken a look at schedules and time tracking in T-sheets, and the first half of our Expensify training focusing on mileage tracking and reporting. Now we will be continuing our training by looking at expense reporting in Expensify. Again, we will be working in Expensify this time to train you on how to submit the few expenses that you may have incurred. From the previous training video, you should be familiar with accessing your Expensify account. Just as with mileage tracking, we will be using the Expensify app to submit any other expenses that you might have incurred. Please select Expensify now. As a reminder, if you are required to log in again, I've set you up with your phone number as your default login and a password that I've given you directly. My apologies for the duplication, but for those who may have been viewing these out of order, and as a refresher to all, I will be repeating many of the steps that you saw in the Expensify mileage tracking training video. You will most likely open to the inbox. Your iPad is already set up and configured with your Expensify app set up for you, so you do not need to worry about the messages from the concierge. Instead, please click on the three blue lines in the upper left-hand corner to access the reports screen. Whether you are reporting expenses or mileage, we will always work from the report screen. Expensify gives many different ways for you to do the same thing, but we will always work with the same set of procedures for consistency's sake. If I have to help problem solve something over the phone, if we have a familiar way of doing things, this will definitely ease that process. So select reports from your choices at the left. You will not have very many expenses that you need to track outside of mileage. However, the process is very similar. Some examples of expenses you might incur are document printing. And as a reminder, we will not be reimbursing for printer cartridges, but only for individual printing jobs. So please go to a business center and get a receipt, or if you're printing at home, count the number of pages that you have printed. There will be a few instances where people will need a hotel room, but this is pre-approved and will give you some specific instructions when submitting hotel expenses. Safety equipment is something that we have reimbursed for in the past. For new observers, that should not be a need. We are collecting everybody's requirements for the vest and for a cigarette lighter adapter for charging your iPads. So we will be providing those and you will not need to submit an expense report for those. To get started on an expense, we're going to look at My Reports, choosing one of the already pre-created reports in the training period. Again, you'll notice that I've created 3 expense reports and 3 mileage reports, one for each of the time periods of the survey. For the training and certification period, one for the pre-mobilization in May, and a final report for June for the statewide surveys. So we're selecting the training period expense report, and then we will be adding our first expense, either by clicking the blue button that reads Add Expense, or since this is empty, we can select the blue plus sign or the green plus sign to create the first expense in this report. Again, we are brought to the Create Expense, where we can see all of the choices that we saw previously in mileage. We will manually create an expense. Note, we will not be using the scan receipt as this incurs additional fees while in the use of this software. We create manual, and it brings us to the new expense screen. For this new expense, we'll enter the details, including the merchant, the date, and the total cost of the item, along with a description. Next, we're going to scan an image of the receipt using the built-in camera on your iPad. We do this by clicking the plus icon. This will activate your iPad's camera. You can hold it over your receipt. And once it is centered and in focus, you press the blue button to take a photo. Now we're going to confirm that all of the information is there. Here you'll see that I did not add a description yet. We have the date, and now we can select the description area at the bottom, and a keyboard will come up where we can type in details about the purchase. It's important that you get all of this entered accurately, and we believe this is going to be a much more streamlined process going forward than submitting everything by paper and calculating everything ourselves. As long as we get it entered accurately and matching our receipts, this should become a very easy process once we're familiar with it. If everything looks correct, if the receipt is scanned and in focus, then we can save. This, just like with mileage, brings you directly back to the expense report. In this case, we're working from the training expenses period. You can continue to add additional expenses until you've added everything for the training period reporting. Or if you are in May, you would add it to the pre-mobilization expense report. If you're in June, you would be adding this to your final statewide expense report. In many cases, there will be observers who do not have any expenses to report outside of mileage. In that case, you can simply ignore the 3 expense reports that I pre-created for you. If you've added all the expenses to your period's expense report, then we are done. And we will submit it just as we did with mileage by selecting the Submit Report button. Again, we are brought to what looks like an email screen where we would be submitting an attachment of all of our expenses. If there's any issues, we can back out of this by hitting cancel and return to the previous screen where we can make adjustments to any of the reports, any of the expenses that we've reported. But if we are happy with it, we can hit submit. And that brings us to the end of our expense reporting tutorial. Once something is submitted, we would be returned to that expense report and see that it's in progress and that it is in the hands of our bookkeeper at the back end, who will be submitting this on your behalf to CDOT for reimbursement. Again, don't hesitate to ask for help if there's any situation or any questions you run into. You have many people that you can go to, first to your supervisor. If he or she's unavailable or unable to answer the question, you can come directly to me, Todd Tuell, or Richard, and we'll get the answer to you and help you get everything squared away on your expense reporting. And concludes the Expensify training, and in our next video we will look specifically at a new application, and this is the Seatbelt survey. This is the key to our entire project, where we're collecting the data that we'll be using to submit to CDOT on the seatbelt usage rates. Thank you again for joining me.